part 2 of this video, just want to highlight one other significant person in this time frame of modernity that has contributed to this shift away from God. God is dead, and into this new way of this new mindset, this new thinking of more man-centered, and now it's up to man to create their his own destiny, his or her own destiny, and so forth. So in 1859, The Origin of the Species was published. Nietzsche was, I believe, about a teenager in that time, and there's some debate whether he was influenced by Darwinian thought or he didn't like Darwinian thought, that it was foolish. Either way, the idea was the same, just coming at two different directions. One was more philosophical, and one was more rooted in natural philosophy and what we call science. Okay, they both result in the same place, though, which is the additional death of God. So Nietzsche, is often attributed to God is dead, but in reality, Darwinism had a significant role to play in that as well. So they're just they're additives together. And of course, I'm leading out some other characters as well along the way, some of Darwin's contemporaries, etc. But we arrive at a place. There's no transcendence, of course. There's no accountability potentially, and there's if human beings are just evolved parts of the animal kingdom, then there's no standard to try to hold to. There's no I'll use a pretty heavy theological word here. There's no judgment, right? There's no accountability to any higher being, and there's no standard. Now, going back to Nietzsche's whole God vacuum, if you kill God, there's going to be a vacuum there. There has to be a standard set by something. You see this in Rousseauian thought, even when he derived the social contract, right? He realized that his utopian idea wasn't quite realistic at the time, and so there had to be some sort of social contract. In other words, a set of ethics that had to be followed, that everybody agreed not to harm each other, right? Respect each other's property, and so forth. Okay, and so when I say there's no standard, there of course is a standard, and it points back to it's not whether there's a standard, but which standard is being followed. Where did it come from? Okay, so this is a significant mindset shift. Think about it. Pre-Enlightenment, the majority of thought. If you look at all the natural philosophers, which we'll talk a little about, Galileo, Newton, Da Vinci. They may not have been theists, but they were at least deists, right? They believed in there was a transcendence, right? Some of the significant mathematicians in that medieval time, which I'll highlight at least one of them, from the Muslim world, right? Believed in a transcendence. Okay, so this isn't just the Western world. This is in the larger world, the global world. Okay, and so this is a significant shift, though. Imagine if you were born in 1700, the way you viewed the world was very different than we do today as moderns. Now, the question I have for you is not debating the validity of Darwinism, is instead looking at that mind shift, right? That mindset shift. Has that affected how moderns think about themselves, how they think about the world, and then how they think about their community, and all the way up to the federal government? Okay, if we wanted to think that as the highest thing of the global government or whatever it might be. Okay. Now, one of the offshoots of Darwinism is social Darwinism. Don't mix these two up. They're two separate deals, but they're obviously nested in the same idea. And Darwin himself later became, I'll say invested, but came to align himself with social Darwinism. And, if Darwinism says human beings are nothing more than the animal kingdom, and there must be superior humans compared to other humans, right? Survival of the fittest. Only the fittest will survive. And so you can imagine this gets to some pretty dark places. Okay, some individuals and prominent people in academia, even politics, right? And these weren't small sects of people took this thought and even ran into ideas like eugenics, which is basically identifying groups of people that should be eliminated through sterilization in particular. So this can get pretty ugly. Now, am I saying that's what Darwin had in mind, or if you are an atheist and you follow Darwinian evolution, that you think, no, I'm not saying that. I am saying, though, that ideas have consequences. And so as we look at some of the more darker sides of Darwinian evolution and how it extended into the years following, is some of these thought processes, though, about how we view one another, survival of the fittest kind of mindset. You hear this all the time. Like, I know in sports you hear this all the time. Well, survival of the fittest, right? Only strong will survive. Like, that's like a marketing thing. We see this today. Does that mindset exist outside of sports? I don't know. This is what this class is about. I want you to think critically about that. This picture over here, like you can see, this other picture is a kind of the circus atmosphere that was outside the Scopes monkey trials in the 1920s. And so this was the first challenge. So you might think, okay, this is another kind of tentacle of Darwinian thought. This was the first challenge. It was in Tennessee. The first challenge, legal challenge, to allow for Darwinian thought to be put in the schools. So this is only 1920 in the United States. That up until that point, the predominant thinking was creationist view. There was a transcendence that made everything. And in 1920, it was 1920s, I think it was 1926, was the start of this change, right? In 1968, it was kind of codified as that, okay, now we're going to teach evolution in the schools and not a creationist view. So again, this is new way of thinking. This is from modernity. Do you think that this shift has had any consequences on how we view ourselves and around? Think about the different dimensions of wellness. Obviously, the spiritual realm is going to be a significant one. And I'm not trying to lead you into the answer of, oh yeah, that's had a terrible, profound effect. I don't know, but I mean, one way or the other, though, there has been a change in what people think about God, like God's transcendence, whatever it is, and in how they relate to that God, or the supreme being, or whatever it may be, and how then they operate in their day to day, right? How they deal with stressors, how they deal with changes in their fate, right? Just like that video alluded to. So, like it or not, those are, these are downstream things from one thought. I'm just trying to highlight this. Some of them a little darker, right? If we went to eugenics, thankfully that's typically no longer talked about. Thank goodness, and good riddance forever. Hopefully never come back. That's just some heinous thinking. And it led to some, even some attributed to the Holocaust, right? And Hitler adopted some of these things. I don't want to draw too straight a line between those, just because I feel like that's taking things pretty far. But if you look at some of the hierarchy that's created in that heinous thinking, it may have some of its roots in social Darwinism. Okay. Now I have one little exercise here, thinking about. I'm trying to frame this importance of the mindset. And in 1798, Thomas Malthus published a essay called The Principle of Population, and basically proposed that. So this is, end of the Enlightenment period, beginning of modernity, right? And everything's on a light switch, so there's this kind of blending of the two time frames. But he proposed at the time, in looking at the agricultural production that was at the time, that the food production was increasing at a linear rate, but that the population was increasing exponentially, and that eventually the population would outrun the food supply, and then we'd have problems. Think like Hunger Games, right? Familiar with those movies. And so obviously this didn't happen, but in this same time frame, 60 years later, when Darwin published his Origin of the Species, this idea of the survival of the fittest seemed to fit this particular concern, that, again, only the fittest should survive. And so, again, you can see how this kind of bad thinking, in terms of social Darwinism, started to get in some dark places. Okay? So, in this example, though, what I'm really getting at is, let's say you were presented with this situation, like you believe this is true. This is pretty heavy information. Like, this is saying the population, like, we're in trouble. In a heavy situation like this, and this is more of like a global thing, okay? This is even a personal issue. Where do you place the stress in the situation? Now, obviously, you want to do something about it either way, whether you were following more of a kind of a self-centered, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but self-centered, more of a Darwinistic approach, meaning there's nothing outside of me. I have to take care of this. We have to take care of this, whatever it is. Or projecting this onto a transcendence, say, through prayer or meditation or whatever it may be, this being or supreme being or gods or whatever it may be, this transcendence will help me through this. Okay? So I'm just trying to give an example. You can see the stressors may be a little different. How you approach the problem may be a little different. If it's more internalized, or if you release some of that into the external. Do you think that's true? Right? Do you think that's so? That's what I want you to wrestle this week. So, again, just to be clear, this isn't about wrestling with Darwinism as a theory. It's wrestling with the shift in mindset, which is very real over the last 100 years or so, right? And if we think about in the United States, about 100 years, but if you go a little bit further, Darwinism, obviously, you're talking about 150 years or so. That's not very long, right? Do you think there's any downstream effects from this shift of God is dead and all these different three different characters that I've kind of highlighted to the unique challenges that moderns face today? that's for you to discuss in your writing and to reflect on. Again, you can push back on ideas, you can embrace ideas. What I'm looking for is the quality of your arguments as you embrace or as you engage with the information. Okay, that's all for now, and I'll see you all in the next video on scientism, maybe one of the leading contenders for what's replaced this God vacuum.